There's nothing harder than watching your dreams disappear in a single moment. Sam Creek, knew this pain better than most, sitting in his wheelchair on the porch where he once saddled horses with the confidence of a man born to ride. 3 years ago, Sam was the finest horseman in 3 counties. Now he watched life pass him by from his chair, his spirit as broken as his body. One evening, a giant wild Mustang appeared at the edge of town. The massive stallion was scarred and untamed, yet something drew him straight to Sam. What happened when this broken cowboy met this wild horse changed everything. The entire town watched as 2 wounded souls found something neither expected to find again. Sam thought his riding days were over forever. But could a man in a wheelchair really connect with a 17-hand Mustang that had never been touched by human hands? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel Creek's wheelchair creaked against the weathered wooden planks of his front porch, a sound that had become as familiar as his own breathing over the past 3 years. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Millbrook, a town that seemed to grow smaller with each passing season. Once, this same porch had been where Sam would sit and oil his saddles, where he'd plan the next day's training sessions with horses that trusted him more than they trusted their own instincts. The spurs, hanging from a nail on the porch wall, caught the dying light, their silver surfaces tarnished now from disuse. Those spurs had walked Sam through county championships, had guided horses through complex maneuvers that seemed like magic to those who watched. Now they hung like museum pieces, reminders of a life that felt more like a dream with each passing day. Sam ran his weathered hands along the wheels of his chair, remembering when those same hands had held reins with the gentle authority that came from understanding. The accident replayed in his mind sometimes, usually in the quiet hours when sleep wouldn't come. It had been a storm unlike any other that October night, with lightning that turned the sky white and thunder that spooked even the calmest horses. He'd been trying to bring in Starlight, his prize mare, when the lightning struck close enough to make the ground shake. She'd reared, panicked, and in the chaos that followed, Sam found himself pinned beneath a fallen tree, his legs crushed and his dreams scattered like leaves in the wind. The town of Millbrook had changed since then, though Sam couldn't tell if it was the place itself or just his perspective from this chair. Where once he'd seen possibility in every sunrise, now he watched the daily rhythm of a community that seemed to be slowly forgetting how to hope. Young people left for bigger cities, family ranches sold to developers, and the old ways of working with horses gave way to machines and shortcuts that missed the soul of the thing entirely. Dr. Morrison made his daily rounds at precisely 4:30, his medical bag in one hand and his persistent optimism in the other. "Afternoon, Sam," he'd say, climbing the 3 steps to the porch with the careful gait of a man who'd seen too many injuries and understood the weight they carried. Doc Morrison had silver hair now, more than when Sam had been whole, and lines around his eyes that spoke of nights spent setting bones and mending what could be mended. Physical therapy would help, Doc would say at least twice a week, pulling out his stethoscope with the practiced efficiency of decades. "Your upper body strength is good, but we could work on—" "I'm fine," Sam would interrupt, because the conversation always went the same direction, toward a future that required him to accept what he could never truly accept. The chair wasn't temporary. The paralysis wasn't something that hard work and determination could overcome. These were facts that Doc Morrison delivered with kindness, but facts nonetheless. Martha Henderson lived in the house next door, a widow herself who understood something about watching life change in ways you never planned for. She'd bring coffee sometimes, real coffee that she ground herself, not the weak stuff that came in tins. Martha had lost her husband to a heart attack 2 winters back, and in the months that followed, she and Sam had developed an unspoken understanding about grief and the way it settled into your bones like an ache that never quite left. "You were something special with those horses," Martha would say, settling into the old rocking chair that had been on the porch longer than Sam could remember. "Still are, I'd imagine. That kind of gift doesn't just disappear because of an accident. But Sam knew better. The gift had been in his legs as much as his hands, in the way he could shift his weight and communicate with an animal through subtle movements that no wheelchair could replicate. He tried to explain this to Martha, to Doc Morrison, to anyone who suggested that his old life was somehow still accessible to him, but the words never came out right. How do you tell someone that losing the use of your legs isn't just about mobility? It's about losing the language you used to speak with the creatures that had defined your entire existence. Mayor Thompson stopped by every few weeks, usually when he had something uncomfortable to discuss that he'd rather handle personally than put in an official letter. Thompson was a good man, Sam supposed, but he'd never understood horses or the people who worked with them. He understood budgets and municipal requirements and the kind of progress that looked good in newspaper headlines. "The old Brennan place is up for sale," Thompson had mentioned the week before, settling his considerable bulk into a chair that groaned under the weight. "Developer from Phoenix wants to put in one of those housing communities. Golf course, swimming pools, the whole thing." Sam had nodded because there wasn't much else to do. The Brennan place had been horse country for 3 generations, rolling pastures where colts learned to run and mares raised their young. Now it would become houses filled with people who'd never understand why the smell of hay could make a man homesick for a life he'd never get back. The evenings were the hardest part of Sam's days, when the sun began its descent behind the mountains and the air cooled enough to make you think about all the rides you'd taken at this same hour. He'd sit on the porch and watch the empty corral behind his house, the fence posts standing like sentinels, guarding nothing. Sometimes he'd imagine he could hear hoofbeats, the rhythmic percussion of a horse moving with purpose and grace, but it was always just the wind moving through the abandoned structures of his former life. That's when the Mustang first appeared. It was a Tuesday evening in late spring, the kind of evening when the light seemed to linger longer than usual, and the air carried the promise of summer on its edges. Sam had been dozing in his chair, lulled by the familiar creaking of the porch and the distant sound of Mrs. Patterson calling her cats in for dinner. He woke to a sensation he couldn't quite name, the feeling that something significant was happening just beyond the edge of his awareness. The horse stood at the far end of his property line, where the fence gave way to open rangeland that stretched toward the mountains. It was massive, easily 17 hands high, with a coat the color of dark chocolate and a mane that moved like water in the evening breeze. Even from a distance, Sam could see the scars that marked the animal's hide, the evidence of a life lived wild and free and dangerous. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The Mustang stood with the stillness that only wild animals possessed, alert but not afraid, curious but cautious. Sam found himself holding his breath, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had brought this magnificent creature to his forgotten corner of the world. The horse took a step forward, then another, moving with the fluid grace that Sam remembered from his dreams. It paused at the fence line, head raised, nostrils flaring as it tested the air for scents that might mean danger or opportunity. Sam's heart pounded in his chest with a rhythm he hadn't felt since before the accident, the excitement of being in the presence of something truly wild and beautiful. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Mustang turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Sam alone with the lingering certainty that everything was about to change. The worn leather halter hung from a hook in Sam's tool shed, gathering dust like everything else that had once defined his purpose. He'd avoided looking at it for months after the accident, but now, 3 days after the Mustang's first appearance, he found himself wheeling slowly through the cluttered space that had once been his workshop. The halter was the last piece of equipment he'd handled before that terrible night, the one he'd grabbed in his desperate attempt to bring Starlight home before the storm hit. His hands trembled as he lifted it from the hook, the leather still supple despite the years of neglect. He could smell the neat's foot oil he'd used to condition it, could feel the careful stitching his father had taught him to check for wear. This halter had been on dozens of horses, had been part of countless training sessions where trust was built, one patient moment at a time. The Mustang had returned the second evening, standing in the same spot at the fence line but staying perhaps 10 minutes longer. On the third evening, he'd moved closer, near enough that Sam could make out the intelligence in his dark eyes and the way his ears swiveled at every sound. Each night, Sam had fought the urge to call out, to make some gesture that might bridge the distance between them. His instincts told him to wait, to let the horse make the choices that would define their relationship. Dr. Morrison found Sam in the tool shed that fourth morning, surrounded by equipment he hadn't touched in 3 years. "Martha was worried when she didn't see you on the porch for your morning coffee," Doc said, settling his medical bag on the workbench with the careful precision of a man who'd learned to respect other people's spaces. "Just looking through some old things," Sam replied, though his voice carried more energy than Doc had heard in months. There was something different about Sam's posture, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of purpose rather than resignation. "Martha mentioned you've been talking about a horse. A wild horse that's been coming around." Doc's tone was carefully neutral, the way medical professionals learned to discuss things that might be symptoms of something larger. Sam looked up from the halter, meeting Doc's eyes directly. "He's real, Doc. Martha saw him too, night before last. Biggest Mustang I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty. Wild horses can be dangerous, Sam, even for someone who—" Doc caught himself before finishing the sentence, but they both knew what he'd been about to say. "Even for someone who could walk, who could move quickly if something went wrong. This one's different," Sam said, his fingers working along the halter's edges with the muscle memory of decades. "He's not looking for trouble, he's looking for something else." That evening, Martha joined Sam on the porch, bringing 2 cups of coffee and settling into the rocking chair with the patience of someone who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, both of them watching the fence line where shadows gathered and possibilities lived. The Mustang appeared just as the first stars became visible, emerging from the rangeland like a creature from another century. This time, he didn't stop at the fence. With deliberate steps, he approached the barrier and stood close enough that they could hear his breathing, could see the way his coat caught the last light of day. "My lord," Martha whispered, her coffee cup forgotten in her hands. "He's beautiful." Sam felt something stir in his chest, a sensation he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope, maybe, or recognition of a chance he'd never expected to receive. The Mustang stood at the fence for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally moving his head to study Sam's position on the porch, but never showing signs of fear or aggression. When Mayor Thompson arrived the next morning with Jake Morrison, Doc's son, trailing behind him, Sam knew the conversation wasn't going to be about municipal budgets or development projects. Thompson had the look of a man carrying bad news, and Jake, normally confident in the way of young men who worked with their hands, seemed uncomfortable with whatever mission had brought them here. "Sam, we need to talk about this horse situation," Thompson began, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief despite the cool morning air. "I've had 3 calls from concerned residents. Mrs. Patterson thinks it might attack her cats. The Hendersons are worried about their grandchildren's safety when they visit." Jake stepped forward, his work-worn hands twisting the brim of his hat. "Dad sent me to take a look around, see if there are tracks, maybe figure out where it's coming from." He paused, glancing at Sam, with something that might have been respect. "I found plenty of sign. Big horse, like you said, but something's odd about the pattern." "Odd how?" Sam asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Horses coming straight here, Sam. Not wandering, not grazing, not looking for water. Every track I found points directly to your property line, like he's got business here specific." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "That's exactly what has people worried. Wild animals that lose their natural fear of humans can become unpredictable. We might need to contact animal control, have them relocate the animal somewhere safer." "Safer for who?" Sam's voice carried an edge that had been absent for 3 years, the kind of authority that came from knowing horses better than most people knew themselves. "That Mustang hasn't shown one sign of aggression. He's not threatening anyone." "You can't know that for certain," Thompson replied. "And if someone gets hurt—" "Nobody's going to get hurt," Sam interrupted, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair with enough force to make his knuckles white. "I've been around horses my entire life, and I'm telling you this animal is no danger to anyone." Jake cleared his throat diplomatically. "What if we set up some kind of observation period? I could come by evenings, keep an eye on things, make sure everything stays peaceful. If the horse causes any problems, we deal with it then." It was a reasonable compromise, the kind of solution that satisfied everyone's immediate concerns, while buying time for better understanding. But as Sam watched Thompson's reluctant nod and Jake's uncertain expression, he realized that time might be the one thing he couldn't afford to waste. The Mustang was here for a reason, and whatever that reason might be, it wouldn't wait for committee decisions or bureaucratic approval. That evening, the Mustang came closer than ever before, approaching within 15 feet of the porch where Sam waited. For the first time since the accident, Sam felt the old electricity of being near a horse that trusted him enough to lower its guard. The Mustang's eyes held intelligence and something else, recognition, perhaps, or the kind of understanding that passed between creatures who had both known loss. Sam spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy, boy. I'm not going anywhere." The Mustang's ears flicked forward, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, Sam thought he saw something in those dark eyes that looked remarkably like hope. Sarah's journal had been tucked away in the bottom drawer of their old dresser, beneath layers of wool sweaters that still carried her scent after 3 years. Sam discovered it while searching for his spare set of work gloves, items he hadn't needed since the accident, but suddenly found himself wanting as he prepared for whatever relationship might develop with the Mustang. The leather-bound book fell open in his hands to a page dated just 2 months before the storm that changed everything. "Sam has a gift that goes beyond technique," she'd written in her careful script. "When I watch him with the horses, I see something that can't be taught in any school or learned from any book. He speaks their language, not with words, but with his whole being. Today he gentled a mare that 3 other trainers had given up on, and he did it by understanding her fear rather than fighting it. I believe this gift comes from something deeper than physical ability. Even if the unthinkable happened and he couldn't ride anymore, I think the horses would still know him, still trust him." Sam's hands shook as he read the words, feeling Sarah's faith reach across the years to touch something in his chest that had been dormant since the accident. She'd believed in him with a certainty that had sustained him through difficult training sessions and challenging horses, but he'd forgotten that her faith had extended beyond his physical capabilities. Sarah had seen something in him that he'd lost sight of entirely. The work gloves fit better than he'd expected, the leather worn soft from years of handling ropes and reins. Sam spent the morning going through his old equipment with the methodical care of a man preparing for something important. He cleaned and oiled the halter until it gleamed, inspected lead ropes for wear, and sorted through bits and bridles with the attention to detail that had once been automatic. Martha found him in the tool shed just after lunch, wheeling between workbenches with an energy she hadn't seen since before the accident. "You're planning something," she observed, settling into an old chair that Sam kept for visitors who understood that good work took time. "Maybe," Sam admitted, running his thumb along a lead rope to check for frayed spots. "That Mustang is trying to tell me something, Martha. Sarah used to say that horses don't lie, that everything they do has meaning if you're smart enough to read it. And what do you think this one is trying to tell you?" Sam paused in his inspection of a worn rope halter, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think he's as lost as I am. But I also think maybe we're meant to find something together." Jake Morrison arrived that afternoon with the official purpose of checking on the horse situation, but the practical goal of understanding what Sam Creek might be planning. Jake had grown up hearing stories about Sam's legendary abilities with horses, tales that had seemed almost mythical to a boy who'd never witnessed them firsthand. Now, watching Sam work through his equipment with practiced efficiency, Jake began to understand that the stories might have been understated rather than exaggerated. "My dad's worried you might try something foolish," Jake said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced that concern was warranted. "Your dad's a good man and a fine doctor," Sam replied, testing the spring mechanism on an old halter. but he thinks of horses as large, unpredictable animals that kick and bite. He's not wrong, but he's not entirely right either. And you think this Mustang is different? Sam looked up from his work, meeting Jake's eyes with the direct gaze of a man who'd spent his life making judgments that mattered. I think every horse is different, Jake. The trick is figuring out what makes each one unique, what they need from you to feel safe enough to trust. That evening, Sam positioned his wheelchair closer to the fence than he'd dared before, close enough that he could clearly see the Mustang's approach across the rangeland. The big horse moved with the fluid grace of an animal that had never known the constraint of saddle or bridle, but there was purpose in his movement that suggested intelligence and decision rather than mere instinct. When the Mustang reached his usual position at the fence, Sam made his first deliberate move. Slowly, carefully, he pulled an apple from the bag Martha had prepared for him, holding it up so the horse could see it clearly. The Mustang's nostrils flared as he caught the scent, his head lifting with interest but not alarm. "Easy, big fellow," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm authority he'd used with countless horses over the years. "Just an apple, nothing that's going to hurt you." He tossed the apple gently, landing it halfway between the fence and where the Mustang stood. The horse studied the offering for a long moment before stepping forward with the careful deliberation of an animal that had learned to be cautious about human gifts. When he lowered his head to investigate the apple, Sam felt a surge of something he'd almost forgotten, the deep satisfaction of successful communication with a creature that spoke only in gesture and instinct. The Mustang ate the apple with obvious enjoyment, his powerful jaws working with an efficiency that spoke of good health and vitality. When he finished, he raised his head and looked directly at Sam, and for the first time since the accident, Sam felt like he was having a real conversation with a horse. "Tomorrow, I'll have another one for you," Sam promised. "But tomorrow, maybe you'll let me get a little closer." Jake watched from the corner of the house, taking notes for his father's report, but finding himself drawn into the careful dance of trust that was beginning between the broken cowboy and the wild horse. There was something happening here that went beyond the simple interaction of man and animal, something that made Jake think of the old stories his grandfather used to tell about the days when understanding horses was a matter of survival rather than hobby. As the Mustang finally turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness, Sam remained by the fence for another hour, thinking about Sarah's journal and the faith she'd expressed in abilities he'd thought were lost forever. The chair couldn't take away what he'd learned in 40 years of working with horses, couldn't diminish the patience and understanding that had made him the horseman he'd been. For the first time since the accident, Sam Creek began to believe that maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe the gift was deeper than physical ability. Maybe it was something that could survive even the worst kind of loss. Maybe it was something that could heal not just him, but the magnificent creature that chose to visit him each evening as the sun set over the mountains. The sugar cubes sat in a small canvas bag on Sam's lap, each one individually wrapped in tissue paper with the care of someone who understood that small gestures could carry enormous weight. Martha had suggested them after watching the Mustang's obvious enjoyment of the apple, remembering how Sam's horses had always been partial to sweet treats delivered with patience and respect. "Sugar cubes were always my secret weapon," Sam explained to Jake, who had taken to arriving each evening just before sunset to witness what the young man was beginning to think of as a daily miracle. Not because horses need the sugar, but because offering something sweet requires them to get close enough to take it from your hand. It's about trust, not treats. The Mustang had accepted apples for a week now, each evening coming a step or two closer before taking the offered fruit. His approach had become routine enough that Sam could predict almost to the minute when the big horse would appear at the fence line, but routine hadn't diminished the sense of wonder that filled Sam each time he saw that magnificent creature choosing to visit him. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, Sam had decided to offer something that would require the Mustang to come close enough to touch, close enough for both of them to take the kind of risk that real relationships demanded. "What if he won't come close enough?" Jake asked, settling into the lawn chair Martha had provided for his evening observations. What if he's too wild to trust a human that much? Sam unwrapped one of the sugar cubes, holding it in his palm, where the evening light made it gleam like a small crystal. Then we'll know something important about him, and we'll adjust accordingly. But I don't think that's going to be the problem. What do you think the problem will be? Whether I'm brave enough to let him get that close to me. The admission surprised Jake, who had assumed that fear would run in the opposite direction, that the Mustang would be afraid of Sam, not the other way around. But as he watched the older man's face, Jake began to understand that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about choosing to act despite it. The Mustang appeared right on schedule, emerging from the rangeland, with the purposeful stride that had become familiar over the past weeks. But tonight, instead of stopping at his usual distance, he approached the fence directly, stopping only when the wooden rails separated him from Sam's outstretched hand. "Well, hello there, beautiful," Sam said softly, his voice carrying the kind of warmth usually reserved for old friends. "I've got something special for you tonight." He held out his palm with the sugar cube, keeping his hand steady despite the tremor of excitement that ran through his entire body. The Mustang stretched his neck forward, his nostrils flaring as he investigated this new offering. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the horse hesitated, caught between curiosity and caution. Then, with the delicate precision that only horses possessed, the Mustang's lips brushed against Sam's palm as he took the sugar cube. The contact lasted only seconds, but it was the first time since his accident that Sam had felt the soft warmth of a horse's muzzle against his skin. The sensation shot through him like electricity, awakening nerve pathways that had been dormant since he'd last worked with horses. "That's a good boy," Sam whispered, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with coming home. "That's my brave, beautiful boy." The Mustang crunched the sugar cube with obvious pleasure, then immediately began investigating Sam's empty palm, looking for more. Sam laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months, the sound startling both Jake and the horse. "Greedy, aren't you?" Sam said, unwrapping another cube, "just like every horse I've ever known, food, motivated and honest about it." As the days passed, the evening ritual evolved into something more complex and meaningful. The Mustang began arriving earlier, sometimes appearing while Sam was still having dinner on the porch. He would stand at the fence with the patience of a creature that had learned to wait for good things, occasionally nickering softly when Sam appeared with the canvas bag of treats. Martha began joining them regularly, bringing coffee for herself and Sam, while they watched the careful dance of trust-building between man and horse. She had started keeping a journal of her own, documenting the progress with the detailed attention of someone who recognized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. "He's not just taking treats anymore," she observed one evening as the Mustang lingered for nearly an hour after finishing his sugar cubes. "He's staying for the company. Look at how he positions him close enough to interact, but far enough to run if he needs to. He's choosing to be here." Sam nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The Mustang's body language spoke of an animal that was no longer simply tolerating human presence, but actively seeking it out. His ears stayed forward when Sam spoke to him, his head lowered in the relaxed posture of a horse that felt safe in his current environment. But not everyone in Millbrook was pleased with the developing relationship. Mrs. Patterson had organized what she called a concerned citizens meeting at the town hall, demanding action about the dangerous wild animal that was habituating to human contact in an unsafe manner. Mayor Thompson found himself caught between those who supported Sam's progress and those who worried about liability and public safety. "I've got insurance to think about," Thompson explained during one of his increasingly frequent visits to Sam's porch. "If that horse hurts someone, if a child gets too close, if something goes wrong—" "Nothing's going to go wrong," Sam interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had worked with horses when the stakes were life and death. "That Mustang has had dozens of opportunities to show aggression, and he's shown nothing but curiosity and intelligence. But you can't guarantee. I can guarantee that he's safer than most of the horses in this county," Sam said firmly. "I can guarantee that he's shown more sense and self-control than some of the people who are complaining about him." Jake had become an unofficial mediator in these discussions, his youth and diplomatic nature helping to bridge the gap between Sam's certainty and the town's concerns. "What if we set up some basic safety protocols?" he suggested. "Keep children away from the fence line during the evening visits. Maybe put up some warning signs. Establish clear boundaries." It was a reasonable compromise, the kind of solution that allowed everyone to save face while protecting what was becoming the most important part of Sam's daily existence. The Mustang seemed to understand the increased human attention, becoming more cautious when strangers were present, but maintaining his trust in Sam and the small circle of people who had proven themselves worthy of his confidence. On a Thursday evening in early summer, as the Mustang finished his third sugar cube and showed no signs of leaving, Sam made a decision that surprised even himself. Slowly, carefully, he reached out with his free hand and touched the horse's neck, just behind the jaw where the skin was soft and sensitive. The Mustang froze for a moment, every muscle tense with the possibility of flight. Then, as Sam's gentle stroking continued, the big horse relaxed into the contact, his eyes half closing with something that looked remarkably like contentment. "There we go," Sam murmured, his hand moving with the practiced skill of decades spent reading the subtle signals that horses use to communicate comfort or distress. "There's my good boy. Nobody's going to hurt you here." Jake watched in amazement as the scene unfolded, understanding that he was witnessing something that went far beyond simple animal training. This was communication at its most fundamental level, trust being built one gentle touch at a time, between two creatures that had both known the kind of loss that changes everything. As the Mustang finally moved away and disappeared into the gathering darkness, Sam remained by the fence with his hand extended, still feeling the warmth of contact that had reminded him who he used to be and who he might become again. The custom mounting block took shape in Sam's workshop over the course of 2 weeks, built with the methodical precision of a man who understood that his life might depend on getting the details right. Jake had become an enthusiastic partner in the project, bringing his young strength to complement Sam's experience, while Martha provided the voice of reason that kept both men focused on safety rather than just possibility. "It needs to be low enough that I can transfer from the wheelchair," Sam explained, running his hands along the smooth wooden platform they'd constructed, "but high enough that a horse won't feel trapped underneath it, and stable enough that if something goes wrong, it won't collapse and make everything worse." The mounting block represented more than just adaptive equipment. It was Sam's declaration that he intended to pursue a relationship with the Mustang that went beyond sugar cubes and gentle touches. The design incorporated everything he'd learned about working with horses from a seated position, with rails for support, a non-slip surface, and carefully calculated angles that would allow him to transfer from wheelchair to horseback without requiring the kind of athletic ability his accident had taken away. "You really think he'll let you on his back?" Jake asked, testing the stability of the platform with his full weight. "I mean, he trusts you enough to take treats and let you touch him, but riding is different. That's predator behavior from his perspective." Sam nodded, understanding the validity of Jake's concern. "You're right, that it's different. But I've been watching him, studying his body language, his responses to different situations. This isn't just any wild horse, Jake. He's been making choices that show intelligence and judgment that go beyond normal Mustang behavior." The evidence was compelling. Over the past month, the Mustang had demonstrated a level of trust and communication that impressed even Jake, who had grown up around horses and thought he understood their capabilities. The big horse would now approach the fence immediately upon seeing Sam, would accept treats directly from his hand, and had begun showing signs of actual affection, nuzzling Sam's shoulder, resting his head near Sam's wheelchair, even seeming to enjoy having his neck and shoulder stroked. More intriguingly, the Mustang had started displaying what Sam recognized as problem-solving behavior. When Martha accidentally dropped her coffee cup one evening, the horse had investigated the unfamiliar sound with curiosity rather than fear, eventually approaching close enough to sniff the broken ceramic. When a thunderstorm sent most animals running for shelter, The Mustang had remained at the fence, seeking comfort from Sam's presence, rather than fleeing from the familiar sound that had once been associated with terror. Dr. Morrison visited the workshop one afternoon, ostensibly to check on Sam's physical condition, but obviously concerned about the increasingly ambitious nature of his patient's plans. "I'm not going to pretend I understand what you're trying to accomplish here," Doc said, examining the mounting block with the careful attention of a man who'd seen too many accidents. "But if you're determined to pursue this, we need to talk about medical precautions." "What kind of precautions?" Sam asked, though his tone suggested he was prepared to listen rather than argue. "Emergency protocols for starters. If something goes wrong, if you fall, if the horse spooks, you need people here who know how to respond. You need communication equipment, first aid supplies, and a clear understanding of what situations require immediate medical intervention." It was a sobering conversation that forced Sam to confront the reality of his physical limitations. His legs couldn't absorb the impact of a fall, couldn't help him maintain balance if a horse moved unexpectedly. Any mistake could result in injuries that would be catastrophic for someone in his condition. But the conversation also reinforced Sam's growing conviction that the Mustang represented an opportunity that might never come again. The horse's behavior suggested not just intelligence, but something approaching emotional connection, the kind of bond that transcended the usual barriers between human and animal. "I understand the risks, Doc," Sam said finally, "but I also understand that some opportunities don't come twice. If I don't try this, if I let fear keep me from finding out what's possible, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." The Mustang's training progressed gradually, with each session building on the success of the previous one. Sam introduced him to the sight and smell of various pieces of equipment: halters, lead ropes, saddle blankets, always allowing the horse to investigate at his own pace and retreat if he felt uncomfortable. The big Mustang showed remarkable curiosity about these human artifacts, often spending long minutes examining items with the thorough attention of an animal that was learning to trust but hadn't forgotten the importance of caution. Jake proved invaluable during these sessions, his younger reflexes and mobility allowing him to handle equipment while Sam focused on communication with the horse. The partnership between the three of them, man, horse, and apprentice, developed into something that felt natural and sustainable, each member contributing what they could while respecting the limitations and strengths of the others. "He's not like any horse I've ever worked with," Jake observed one evening, as the Mustang allowed Sam to drape a soft rope across his neck. "Most horses, even the gentle ones, have moments where they test you, where they try to see what they can get away with. This one seems to understand that you can't handle that kind of testing." Sam nodded, having made the same observation. The Mustang's behavior suggested an almost supernatural awareness of Sam's physical limitations, adjusting his own movements and responses to accommodate the fact that his human partner couldn't leap out of the way if something went wrong. It was the kind of sensitivity that professional therapy horses developed after years of training, yet this wild Mustang seemed to possess it instinctively. Martha documented each session with the careful attention of someone who understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Her notes captured not just the technical progress, but the emotional development of the relationship. The way Sam's entire demeanor had changed, as the work with the Mustang gave him a sense of purpose he'd lost since the accident. "You should see yourself when you're working with him," she told Sam one afternoon as they reviewed her photographs of the previous evening's session. "You look like the man you used to be before the accident. Not physically, but in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. You look like someone who knows exactly who he is and what he's supposed to be doing." The observation struck Sam more deeply than Martha probably intended. He had felt the change in himself, the gradual return of confidence and purpose that came from using skills he'd thought were lost forever. Working with the Mustang required all of his accumulated knowledge about horse behavior, all of his patience and intuition, all of the subtle communication abilities that had made him legendary in his younger days. But it required something more, as well, a willingness to be vulnerable, to trust not just in his own abilities, but in the wisdom and gentleness of a creature that had every reason to fear and distrust human contact. The Mustang was choosing to work with him despite the obvious risks, and that choice demanded a level of courage and faith that Sam was still learning to summon. The mounting block was finally ready on a Tuesday morning in midsummer, positioned near the fence, where the Mustang had grown comfortable with their daily interactions. Sam tested every joint and surface one final time, making sure that his weight was distributed properly and that the structure would remain stable under the dynamic forces that mounting and dismounting would create. "Tomorrow evening," he announced to Jake and Martha, "if he's willing, if the conditions are right, tomorrow evening I'm going to try to get on his back." The words hung in the air with the weight of a promise and a prayer, representing months of careful preparation and a lifetime of hope that had survived the worst kind of disappointment. Sam Creek was ready to find out if the gift Sarah had written about in her journal was strong enough to bridge the gap between who he had been and who he might still become. The old saddle blanket had been folded in tissue paper and stored in a cedar chest for 3 years, along with other reminders of Sam's former life that had become too painful to look at. It was made of thick wool, hand-woven by a Navajo woman in New Mexico who'd understood that the relationship between horse and rider began with the small details that spoke of respect and care. The blanket bore the subtle patterns that marked it as something special, not just functional equipment, but a bridge between two worlds. Martha helped Sam unfold it that Wednesday morning, the wool releasing the scent of sage and horse sweat and countless rides across country that stretched beyond the horizon. The blanket was the last piece of tack Sam had used before the accident, the one that had been on Starlight's back when the storm hit and everything changed forever. "Are you sure about this one?" Martha asked gently, understanding the emotional weight the blanket carried. "We could get something new, something that doesn't have those memories attached to it." Sam ran his fingers along the blanket's edge, feeling the careful stitching that had held up through years of hard use. "Those memories are exactly why it needs to be this one," he said. "If I'm going to try this, if I'm going to ask that Mustang to carry me, then I need to bring everything I am to the relationship. The good memories and the painful ones, the confidence and the fear, all of it." The evening session began like all the others, with the Mustang appearing at his usual time and approaching the fence with the purposeful stride that had become as familiar as sunrise. But tonight, Sam had positioned the mounting block within easy reach, and the saddle blanket lay folded across his lap where the horse could see and smell it. Jake positioned himself on the far side of the fence, close enough to help if needed, but far enough away that his presence wouldn't interfere with the delicate communication between Sam and the Mustang. Dr. Morrison had insisted on being present for this attempt, arriving with a medical bag and the kind of determined expression that meant he was prepared for anything from triumph to disaster. "Easy, big fellow," Sam said as the Mustang approached, his voice carrying the calm authority that had gentled hundreds of horses over the decades. "I've got something new for you tonight. Something that might feel strange at first, but I need you to trust me." He unfolded the blanket slowly, letting the Mustang see and smell it before making any move to use it. The horse's nostrils flared as he investigated this new element in their routine, his head lowering to sniff the wool with the thorough attention that wild animals gave to anything unfamiliar. The Mustang's reaction was immediate and surprising. Instead of showing the caution or suspicion that Sam had expected, the horse actually stepped closer, pressing his muzzle against the blanket with what could only be described as recognition. His ears came forward in the relaxed posture of an animal that had found something familiar and comforting. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake whispered, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. "It's like he knows that blanket." Sam felt his heart skip as the implications of the Mustang's behavior became clear. This wasn't just acceptance of a new piece of equipment, this was recognition of something the horse had encountered before. The blanket carried scents and memories that meant something to this particular animal, connections that went beyond the simple trust they'd been building over the past months. With infinite care, Sam draped the blanket across the Mustang's withers, ready to pull it away immediately if the horse showed any sign of distress. Instead, the Mustang stood perfectly still, his eyes half closed in an expression of contentment that suggested the weight of the blanket felt right and familiar. "That's my brave boy," Sam murmured, adjusting the blanket's position with the practiced hands of someone who'd performed this ritual thousands of times. "You remember this, don't you? You remember what it means to carry something on your back." The session lasted nearly 2 hours, with Sam gradually increasing the weight and complexity of what the Mustang would accept. First, the blanket alone, then the blanket with Sam's jacket draped over it, then the blanket weighted with a bag of sand that approximated the weight of a rider. Through it all, the Mustang remained calm and cooperative, showing none of the resistance or fear that untrained horses typically displayed when introduced to tack. Jake found himself taking detailed notes, documenting behavior that challenged everything he thought he knew about wild horses. "This isn't normal, is it?" he asked Sam during a break, while the Mustang grazed contentedly nearby, the blanket still draped across his back. "Wild horses don't just accept equipment like this. They fight it, they try to buck it off, they run away." "You're right," Sam agreed, though his attention remained focused on the Mustang's relaxed posture and peaceful demeanor. "This isn't normal wild horse behavior. But then, I don't think we're dealing with a normal wild horse." Dr. Morrison had been watching the proceedings with the clinical attention of a man who'd learned to observe details that others might miss. "The way he responds to that blanket," Doc said thoughtfully, "it's like muscle memory. Like his body remembers carrying weight, even if his mind doesn't consciously recall the experience." The observation resonated with something Sam had been sensing but hadn't been able to articulate. The Mustang's acceptance wasn't just about trust, it was about familiarity, about physical responses that suggested previous training that had been buried but not erased by years of wild living. As the session drew to a close and Sam removed the blanket from the Mustang's back, the horse turned and nuzzled his shoulder with an affection that felt profound and personal. This wasn't the casual acknowledgement of a provider of treats, but the recognition that passed between partners who understood each other on a level that transcended words or even conscious thought. "Tomorrow," Sam announced as the Mustang finally moved away and disappeared into the gathering darkness. "Tomorrow, if he's willing, I'm going to try to get up there." The words carried the weight of a decision that had been building for months, the culmination of trust and preparation and hope that had sustained Sam through the darkest period of his life. The Mustang had accepted the blanket, had shown that he could carry weight without panic or resistance, had demonstrated the kind of partnership that made riding possible rather than just dangerous. Martha packed up her camera equipment with hands that trembled slightly from emotion rather than age. She documented the entire session, capturing images that told the story of two wounded creatures finding their way toward healing through each other. In her photographs, she could see the transformation that had taken place, not just in the relationship between Sam and the Mustang, but in Sam himself, the return of confidence and purpose that came from discovering that his deepest gifts had survived even the worst kind of loss. "You know what this means, don't you?" she asked Sam, as Jake helped her load her equipment into her car. "It means tomorrow I find out if Sarah was right," Sam replied, his gaze still fixed on the spot where the Mustang had disappeared. "It means tomorrow I find out if some gifts are bigger than the accidents that try to take them away." The faded photograph emerged from a stack of county records that Jake had been sorting through at the courthouse, part of his research into local horse registrations that might explain the Mustang's unusually calm behavior around humans. The image was black and white, dated 15 years earlier, showing a mare and her newborn foal standing in a pasture that Jake immediately recognized as Sam's backfield. The mare was unmistakably Starlight Sam's prize breeding stock, with the distinctive white blaze and 3 white socks that had made her legendary in the local horse community. But it was the foal that made Jake's hands tremble as he studied the photograph. Even as a youngster, The colt showed the powerful build and intelligent eyes that belonged to the Mustang, who now visited Sam each evening. Jake drove straight to Sam's house, the photograph burning like fire in his shirt pocket. He found Sam in the workshop, making final adjustments to a modified halter that would work with his limited mobility, preparing for the evening when he planned to attempt his first ride in 3 years. "Sam," Jake said, his voice tight with excitement and uncertainty, "I found something at the courthouse, something you need to see." The photograph hit Sam like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his hands shake as he recognized not just Starlight, but the impossible implications of what he was looking at. The foal in the picture bore the unmistakable markings and build of the Mustang who had been visiting him. But that was impossible. Starlight had been lost in the same storm that had injured Sam, disappeared into the wilderness with no trace left behind. "This can't be right," Sam whispered, though his heart was already accepting what his mind struggled to comprehend. Starlight was lost that night. The storm spooked her, she ran into the darkness, and we never found her body or any sign of where she'd gone. Jake pulled out additional documents he'd discovered in the courthouse files, breeding records that told a story neither of them had known existed. According to these papers, Starlight was bred to Thunder Ridge, the stallion from the Martinez ranch, just 2 months before the storm. The timing would be exactly right for her to have been carrying this foal when she disappeared. The implications crashed over Sam in waves that left him dizzy with recognition and loss and impossible hope. The Mustang who had chosen to visit him, who had shown such remarkable trust and intelligence, who had accepted the saddle blanket with the familiarity of a horse who remembered being ridden, this wasn't just any wild horse. This was Starlight's son, born in the wilderness after his mother's escape, raised wild but carrying in his blood and bones the genetic memory of partnership with humans. "That's why he came to me," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's why he showed no fear, why he seemed to understand things that wild horses shouldn't understand. He carries Starlight's bloodline, her temperament, maybe even some memory of this place where he was conceived." Martha arrived to find both men sitting in stunned silence. The photograph and papers spread across the workbench like evidence of a miracle that neither of them had been prepared to believe. When Jake explained the discovery, Martha's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the profound sense that fate had orchestrated something beyond human understanding. "Starlight survived the storm," Martha said, studying the photograph with the wonder of someone witnessing divine intervention. "She survived, and she lived long enough to give birth to her son, and somehow he found his way back here to you." The revelation recontextualized everything that had happened over the past months. The Mustang's immediate trust wasn't just about Sam's skill with horse-it, was about recognition that ran deeper than conscious memory. A genetic inheritance that had drawn the young stallion back to the place where his mother had been happy and safe and loved. Dr. Morrison arrived that evening to find the three of them still processing the implications of Jake's discovery. When he learned the truth about the Mustang's identity, Doc's medical skepticism gave way to something approaching awe. "The odds against this happening," Doc said, shaking his head in amazement. "The odds that Starlight would survive, that she'd give birth successfully in the wild, that her son would grow to maturity and somehow find his way back here, it's beyond calculation." "Maybe that's the point," Sam replied, his hands still trembling as he looked at the photograph. "Maybe some things aren't supposed to be calculated. Maybe some things are supposed to be accepted as gifts, even when we can't understand how or why they came to us." The Mustang appeared at his usual time, but tonight Sam saw him with completely different eyes. This wasn't just a wild horse who had chosen to trust him, this was Starlight's son, carrying her bloodline and her memories, returning to the place where his story had begun. The scars that marked his hide told the story of a life lived in freedom, but his eyes held the intelligence and gentleness that had made his mother legendary. "Hello, son," Sam said softly, the words carrying weight that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something sacred. "I should have known. I should have seen her in your eyes, in the way you move, in the way you chose to trust me when every instinct should have told you to run." The Mustang approached the fence with his usual confidence. But tonight there seemed to be something different in his demeanor, a sense of completion that suggested he too understood that missing pieces of a puzzle had finally fallen into place. When Sam reached out to stroke his neck, the horse leaned into the contact with an affection that felt like coming home. Jake watched the interaction with new understanding, recognizing now why the Mustang's behavior had seemed so unusual for a wild horse. This wasn't a wild horse, this was a domestic horse's son, carrying genetic memories of partnership and trust that had been awakened by contact with the man who had loved his mother. "What does this mean for tomorrow?" Jake asked. "Does knowing who he is change your plans?" Sam considered the question seriously, understanding that the revelation changed everything and nothing simultaneously. The Mustang was still a powerful, potentially dangerous animal who had lived wild for years. But he was also Starlight's son, carrying her bloodline and her trust, returning to complete a circle that had been broken by storm and tragedy and time. "It means tomorrow isn't just about whether I can ride again," Sam said finally. "It means tomorrow is about whether Starlight's son and I can find the partnership that she and I never got to finish. It means tomorrow is about healing something that was broken the night we lost each other." As the Mustang finally moved away and disappeared into the darkness, Sam remained by the fence holding the photograph of his beloved mare and her foal. The discovery had transformed what he'd thought was a story about overcoming disability into something much larger, a story about love and loss and the mysterious ways that life sometimes offered second chances to those brave enough to accept them. The stars came out one by one above Millbrook, illuminating a night that had changed everything and a tomorrow that promised to reveal whether some bonds were strong enough to survive even death and separation and years of believing that all hope was lost. The modified Western saddle represented months of careful planning and adaptation, its leather surfaces worn smooth by Sam's own hands as he worked to create something that would serve both his needs and the Mustang's comfort. Jake had helped him install additional safety straps and support features, modifications that would help Sam maintain his seat without relying on the leg strength he no longer possessed. The stirrups had been adjusted to accommodate his paralyzed legs, and a special harness system would keep him secure without restricting his ability to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts in weight and posture. Every detail had been considered and reconsidered, from the placement of the saddle horn that would give Sam something to grip in an emergency to the soft padding that would distribute his weight evenly across the Mustang's back. This wasn't just equipment, it was the physical embodiment of hope and determination and the accumulated wisdom of 40 years spent understanding how humans and horses could work together safely. "The balance is everything," Sam explained to Jake as they made final adjustments to the stirrup length. "I can't use my legs to grip, can't absorb shock through my knees the way I used to. Everything has to come from my core, from staying centered and moving with the horse instead of against him." Dr. Morrison had spent the previous afternoon putting Sam through a series of physical tests, measuring his upper body strength and flexibility, assessing his ability to maintain his position under various conditions. The results had been encouraging. Sam's arms and shoulders had maintained much of their strength, and his balance, while different than it had been before the accident, was still functional for the kind of controlled riding he was planning. "Your center of gravity is higher now that you can't distribute weight through your legs," Doc had explained, sketching diagrams that showed how Sam's body would interact with the horse's movement. "That means you'll need to be more conscious of leaning and shifting, more deliberate about maintaining your position. But it's definitely possible, especially with a horse that's as steady and responsive as this one seems to be." The physical therapy sessions that week had focused specifically on riding-related exercises, strengthening the muscles Sam would need and practicing the transfers that would get him from wheelchair to saddle and back again safely. Martha had documented each session, creating a visual record of Sam's preparation that captured both his determination and his underlying fear. "You don't have to do this," she reminded him during one particularly challenging practice session. No one would think less of you if you decided the risk was too great. You've already accomplished something amazing just by building the relationship you have with him. Sam paused in his exercises, considering Martha's words with the seriousness they deserved. The fear was real fear of falling, fear of injury, fear of failing in front of the people who had supported him through this journey. But stronger than the fear was the certainty that this opportunity would never come again, that Starlight's son had returned for a reason that went beyond coincidence or luck. I dreamed about her last night, Sam said quietly. About Starlight. She was young again, the way she was when I first started working with her. And she was telling me that some gifts are meant to be passed down, that love doesn't end just because we lose the ones we love. The dream had felt more real than most of Sam's waking moments, filled with the scent of hay and leather and the sound of Starlight's gentle nickering. In the dream, she had shown him her son, now grown and strong, and had somehow conveyed that the partnership Sam had shared with her was meant to continue through her offspring. Jake had been working with the Mustang daily, introducing him to the sight and feel of the modified saddle, ensuring that the horse was comfortable with equipment that looked and functioned differently than traditional tack. The Mustang's acceptance had been remarkable, stood patiently while Jake adjusted straps and checked fittings, showed no fear of the unfamiliar harness system, and actually seemed to enjoy the process of being fitted with gear that marked him as a partner rather than just a wild animal. He knows something's different, Jake observed as he led the Mustang through practice sessions with the saddle in place. Look at how he carries himself, how he moves. It's like he understands that this equipment means something important is about to happen. The entire town of Millbrook had learned about Sam's planned attempt, words spreading through the community with the speed that news traveled in small places where everyone's business was everyone else's concern. Some residents expressed support and excitement, while others worried about the liability and potential danger of what Sam was attempting. Mayor Thompson had tried to organize some kind of official oversight, but Sam had politely declined any interference that might disrupt the careful relationship he'd built with the Mustang. Mrs. Patterson and her group of concerned citizens had made one final attempt to prevent what they called a reckless endangerment of public safety, petitioning the town council to intervene. But the council had ultimately decided that Sam Creek was a competent adult who had the right to make his own decisions about risk and safety, especially on his own property with his own horse. The weather forecast for the planned attempt was perfect clear skies, gentle breeze, comfortable temperature that would keep both Sam and the Mustang comfortable during what could be a long and emotionally intense session. Jake had arranged for several townspeople to be present as witnesses and potential helpers, while Dr. Morrison would be standing by with emergency medical equipment just in case something went wrong. On the evening before the attempt, Sam sat alone with the Mustang for what he knew might be their last quiet moment together. Tomorrow would bring crowds and cameras and the pressure of public attention, but tonight it was just the two of them, man and horse, bound together by trust and hope and the memory of a mare who had loved them both. Tomorrow we find out if your mother was right, Sam said softly, stroking the Mustang's neck with hands that still trembled slightly from emotion and anticipation. Tomorrow we find out if love is strong enough to bridge the gap between what was lost and what might still be possible. The Mustang stood quietly in the gathering darkness, his presence solid and reassuring, his breathing steady and calm. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever risks they were about to take together, Sam knew that this moment of perfect understanding between them was already a victory that no accident or disability could diminish. As the stars appeared overhead, Sam Creek prepared for the most important ride of his life, knowing that he was about to discover whether the gift Sarah had written about in her journal was strong enough to survive even the worst kind of loss, and emerge transformed but unbroken on the other side of tragedy. Sarah's wedding ring hung from a silver chain around Sam's neck, resting against his chest, where he could feel its gentle weight with each breath he took. He had worn it every day since her death, but today it felt different, not like a memorial to loss, but like a talisman, carrying her belief in his abilities forward into this moment that would define the rest of his life. The morning air was crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect visibility that made every detail sharp and significant. A small crowd had gathered despite the early hour, Martha with her camera, Jake with his medical training and intimate knowledge of both Sam and the Mustang, Dr. Morrison with his emergency equipment, and perhaps a dozen townspeople who had risen before dawn to witness what many believed would be either a miracle or a tragedy. Sam transferred from his wheelchair to the mounting platform, with movements that had been practiced until they became automatic, his upper body strength allowing him to position himself efficiently despite the absence of his legs' assistance. The platform placed him at the perfect height to interact with the Mustang, who stood beside it with the patient stillness of an animal that understood the importance of the moment. "Easy, son," Sam murmured, his voice carrying the calm authority that had guided hundreds of horses through difficult moments over the decades. "Today we find out what we're made of together." The Mustang's response was immediate and reassuring. His ears flicked forward at the sound of Sam's voice, and he shifted his position slightly to make the transfer easier, as if he understood exactly what was being asked of him. The intelligence in his dark eyes suggested awareness that went beyond simple training, a comprehension that this moment would change both their lives forever. Jake stood ready to assist, but his help proved unnecessary as Sam made the transition from platform to saddle with the smooth confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in partnership with horses. The modified saddle held him securely while allowing the freedom of movement necessary for effective communication with his mount, and the Mustang accepted his weight without so much as a tremor of nervousness. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Sam simply sat still and felt the profound joy of being on horseback again. The sensation was both familiar and strange familiar, because his body remembered the feeling of being elevated above the ground, of being in partnership with a powerful animal, but strange because everything about his physical relationship with the horse had changed since his accident. "How does it feel?" Martha called softly, her camera capturing the moment when Sam's face transformed from concentration to wonder. "Like coming home," Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion that he made no attempt to hide. "Like finding something I thought was lost forever." The Mustang stood perfectly still during those first crucial minutes, allowing Sam to adjust to the sensation of being mounted again, while demonstrating the kind of patience and sensitivity that marked him as truly exceptional. His breathing remained steady and calm, his head lowered in the relaxed posture of a horse that felt secure in his partnership with his rider. When Sam finally asked for movementa, gentle pressure with his hands and a subtle shift in his weight, the Mustang responded with the fluid grace of an animal that had been waiting his entire life for this moment. His first steps were careful and deliberate, each hoof placement calculated to provide maximum stability for the rider who could no longer absorb the motion through his legs. The crowd watched in amazed silence as Sam and the Mustang moved together around the small corral that Jake had prepared for their first ride. The partnership between them was evident in every step, the Mustang adjusting his gait and balance to accommodate Sam's different way of sitting, Sam communicating through subtle touches and weight shifts that the horse interpreted with remarkable accuracy. "It's like they've been riding together for years," Jake whispered to Dr. Morrison, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. "Look at how naturally they move together, how the horse anticipates what Sam needs before Sam even asks for it." Dr. Morrison nodded, his medical training allowing him to appreciate the complex physical and psychological adjustments both rider and horse were making in real time. Sam's balance was different than it had been before his accident, but his decades of experience were serving him well, allowing him to maintain his seat through pure upper body strength and an intuitive understanding of how to work with the horse's movement rather than against it. The tears that ran down Sam's face were tears of pure joy, the release of 3 years of grief and loss, and the crushing weight of believing that everything that had defined him was gone forever. Here, on the back of Starlight's son, he was whole again, not the same as he had been before the accident, but whole in a different way that honored both his limitations and his enduring strengths. As they completed their first circuit of the corral, the Mustang's movements became even more confident and smooth, his trust in his rider allowing him to express the natural grace and power that had been hidden during his years of wild living. This wasn't just a man riding a horse. This was the completion of a circle that had been broken by tragedy and mended by love and patience and the mysterious ways that life sometimes offered second chances to those brave enough to accept them. The simple lead rope lay coiled in Jake's hands, unused and unnecessary, as Sam and the Mustang continued their dance around the corral. What had begun as a careful test of compatibility had evolved into something that looked like pure artistry, horse and rider moving together with the kind of harmony that professionals spent years trying to achieve. The Mustang's responses to Sam's subtle cues were immediate and precise, demonstrating an understanding that went far beyond basic training. When Sam shifted his weight slightly to the left, the horse turned with fluid grace. When Sam's hands requested a change of pace, the Mustang adjusted his gait without hesitation or confusion. Most remarkably, when Sam began to tire and his balance became less certain, the horse seemed to sense the change and adjusted his own movement to provide additional stability. "He's taking care of you," Martha observed, her voice filled with wonder as she watched the Mustang compensate for Sam's physical limitations with adjustments so subtle they were almost imperceptible. "Look at how he's shortening his stride when you need more time to adjust. How he's keeping his head lower to help your balance." The crowd that had gathered to witness Sam's attempt had grown throughout the morning, drawn by word-of-mouth reports that something extraordinary was happening at the Creek place. People who had known Sam in his prime stood silent with tears in their eyes, watching him reclaim a part of himself that everyone had assumed was lost forever. Even those who had opposed his relationship with the Mustang found themselves moved by the obvious joy and partnership between man and horse. Dr. Morrison monitored Sam's condition carefully, watching for signs of fatigue or distress that might require immediate intervention. But instead of seeing deterioration, he observed the opposite. Sam's posture was becoming more confident with each passing minute, his communication with the horse more fluid and natural, his entire demeanor transformed by the knowledge that he was still capable of the thing he loved most in the world. "How long has it been?" Sam called to Jake, though his attention remained focused on the Mustang's responses to his guidance. 45 minutes, Jake replied, checking his watch with amazement. "You've been riding for 45 minutes, and he hasn't put a foot wrong." The significance of the time wasn't lost on anyone present. 45 minutes was longer than many experienced riders could maintain their seat on a green horse, longer than anyone had dared hope Sam might manage on his first attempt to ride again. Yet both he and the Mustang seemed energized rather than tired, their partnership growing stronger with each circuit of the corral. Mayor Thompson had arrived with several members of the town council, drawn by reports that were filtering through Millbrook's morning routine. What they found challenged every assumption they'd made about disability and risk and the limits of human adaptability. Sam Creek wasn't just riding again, he was riding with a skill and artistry that reminded everyone why he'd once been considered the finest horseman in 3 counties. "I owe you an apology," Thompson said to Martha during a quiet moment when Sam had paused to let the Mustang rest. "I was wrong about this being dangerous. What I'm seeing here isn't reckless, it's miraculous." The Mustang's obvious joy in carrying Sam was perhaps the most moving aspect of the entire demonstration. His ears remained forward throughout the ride, his movements fluid and enthusiastic, his occasional soft nickering suggesting pleasure rather than stress. This wasn't an animal being forced to accept a burden. This was a horse that had found his purpose, his reason for returning from the wild to reconnect with the human world. When Sam finally decided to dismount, the process was as smooth and controlled as the mounting had been. The Mustang stood absolutely still as Sam transferred his weight back to the mounting platform, showing none of the restlessness that horses often displayed at the end of a riding session. Instead, he turned his head to nuzzle Sam's shoulder, a gesture of affection that brought fresh tears to the eyes of everyone watching. "Good boy," Sam whispered, his hands trembling as he stroked the Mustang's neck. Good boy. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, a sound that might have spooked any normal horse, but that the Mustang accepted, with the calm dignity of an animal that understood he had accomplished something significant. Jake moved quickly to help Sam transfer back to his wheelchair, but his assistance was barely needed. Sam's confidence and strength had been renewed by the success of their ride. As Sam settled back into his chair, the Mustang moved closer rather than moving away, maintaining the connection they had forged during their time together. The horse's behavior suggested that the ride had been as meaningful for him as it had been for Sam, that he too had found something essential that had been missing from his life in the wild. "What happens now?" Martha asked, though she was already documenting the aftermath of the ride with the careful attention of someone who understood she had witnessed history. Sam looked up at the Mustang, who continued to stand close beside his wheelchair, and smiled with a contentment that had been absent from his face for 3 years. "Now we begin," he said simply. "Now we start the real work of being partners." The transformation in Sam was immediately apparent to everyone who had known him before and after his accident. The defeat and resignation that had characterized his demeanor since the storm were gone, replaced by the quiet confidence and sense of purpose that had once made him legendary. He was still paralyzed, still confined to a wheelchair, still facing all the physical limitations that the accident had imposed, but he was no longer broken. Dr. Morrison approached with his medical bag, prepared to conduct the post-ride examination he had insisted upon, but his professional concern gave way to amazement as he observed Sam's condition. "Your color is better than I've seen it in months," Doc said, checking Sam's pulse and blood pressure with the thoroughness of a physician who had worried about this moment for weeks. "Your heart rate is elevated but steady. Your breathing is strong medically speaking. This ride seems to have done you nothing but good." The Mustang allowed the examination to proceed without interference, but he remained close enough to Sam that their connection was never completely broken. His calm presence seemed to provide Sam with an anchor that kept him grounded and confident, even as the reality of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Jake found himself struggling to process everything he had witnessed, his understanding of horses and riding and human potential, all expanded by what Sam and the Mustang had achieved together. "I've been around horses my whole life," he said to Martha, "but I've never seen anything like that." The way they communicated, the way the horse adjusted to Sam's need-sit, was like watching two parts of the same being working together. As the crowd began to disperse, each person carrying away their own piece of the miracle they had witnessed, Sam remained beside the Mustang in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The lead rope that Jake had brought lay forgotten in the grass, made unnecessary by the trust and understanding that had developed between them. The Mustang's dark eyes held intelligence and contentment as he stood beside Sam's wheelchair, occasionally lowering his head to accept gentle strokes along his neck and jaw. For both of them, the successful ride represented not an ending, but a beginning, the start of a partnership that would redefine what was possible when trust and love overcame fear and limitation. As the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, Sam Creek sat beside Starlight's son and felt the profound peace that came from discovering that some gifts were indeed too deep to be destroyed by accident or injury or time. The boy who had dreamed of working with horses had become a man who had mastered that dream, and now, even after losing everything he thought defined him, he had found a way to dream again. The new bridle gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its leather polished to a rich brown that complemented the Mustang's dark coat perfectly. Sam and Jake had crafted it together over the course of several weeks, combining Sam's knowledge of what made equipment functional and comfortable with Jake's young energy and attention to detail. Every stitch had been placed with care, every buckle adjusted to fit the Mustang's head precisely, every piece designed to serve as a tool for communication rather than control. "It's not just about having the right equipment," Sam explained to Jake as they made final adjustments to the bridle's fit. It's about understanding that every piece of tack is part of a conversation between horse and rider. This bridle needs to say that we're partners, not master and servant. 3 months had passed since that first successful ride, and the relationship between Sam and the Mustang, now officially named Phoenix, in honor of his rise from the ashes of Loshad, evolved into something that amazed everyone who witnessed it. They rode together almost daily now, exploring the trails that wound through the rangeland behind Sam's property, their partnership growing stronger and more intuitive with each outing. The therapeutic riding program that had grown out of their success was already serving a dozen clients, people with various disabilities who had been inspired by Sam's example to explore what might be possible for them. Jake had proven to be a natural instructor, his patience and enthusiasm helping others discover that physical limitations didn't have to mean the end of dreams involving horses. Mrs. Rodriguez rode for 20 minutes yesterday, Jake reported with obvious pride. Her first time on a horse since her stroke, and she said it was the first time in 2 years that she felt like herself again. The program had attracted attention from medical professionals and equine therapists across the region, many of them traveling to Millbrook to observe Sam's methods and understand how he had achieved such remarkable results with clients who had been told their riding days were over. The modified equipment he had developed was being studied and replicated, his techniques documented and shared with others who worked in the emerging field of adaptive riding. Martha had become the unofficial historian of Sam and Phoenix's partnership, her photographs and written accounts creating a record that would inspire future generations of riders who faced similar challenges. Her documentation had caught the attention of a publisher in Denver, who was already discussing the possibility of a book that would tell their story to a wider audience. "You've started something bigger than just your own recovery," Martha told Sam, as they watched Phoenix graze contentedly in the pasture that had once seemed so empty and purposeless. "People are coming from hundreds of miles away to see what's possible, to learn from what you've accomplished." The town of Millbrook itself had been transformed by the attention Sam and Phoenix had attracted. The old downtown area was experiencing a revival as visitors came to witness the partnership between the cowboy in the wheelchair and the wild Mustang who had chosen to trust him. The local economy was benefiting from increased tourism, but more importantly, the community had rediscovered a sense of pride and possibility that had been dormant for years. Mayor Thompson had become one of Sam's strongest supporters, finally understanding that what he had initially seen as a liability had become Millbrook's greatest asset. "You've put us on the map," Thompson said during one of his now welcome visits to Sam's porch. "But more than that, you've reminded us all that miracles can happen in the most ordinary places." Dr. Morrison had documented the medical benefits of Sam's return to riding, findings that were being published in journals dedicated to rehabilitation medicine and adaptive sports. Sam's physical condition had improved dramatically, his upper body strength had increased, his cardiovascular health had stabilized, and most importantly, his psychological well-being had been transformed from depression and resignation to purpose and joy. "The therapeutic benefits go far beyond what I could have predicted," Doc reported to a conference of rehabilitation specialists. "But the real breakthrough isn't medical, it's spiritual." Sam Creek found his way back to himself through his connection with that horse, and that kind of healing can't be prescribed or scheduled. Phoenix had adapted to his new life with the same intelligence and grace he had shown during those first tentative meetings at the fence. He seemed to understand that his role extended beyond simply carrying Sam on their ride. She had become a teacher, demonstrating to other horses how to work safely with riders who had different physical needs and capabilities. The Mustang's transformation from wild horse to therapy partner had been remarkable to witness. His natural sensitivity to human emotion had been refined through his work with Sam into an almost supernatural ability to read and respond to the needs of different riders. Children with autism found his calm presence soothing. Veterans dealing with PTSD discovered that his steady reliability helped them manage their anxiety. And adults recovering from strokes or injuries found inspiration in his example of adaptation and resilience. He's not just Phoenix anymore. Sam reflected as he watched the horse work with a young girl who had been born with spina bifida. He's become something larger than himself, something that represents hope for everyone who thinks their dreams are impossible. The evening rides remained Sam and Phoenix's private time together, moments when they could simply enjoy each other's company without the responsibilities of teaching or inspiring others. These quiet sessions in the fading light reminded Sam of the evenings he had spent with Starlight, and sometimes he felt her presence so strongly that he would speak to her, as if she were there beside them. She would be proud of him, Sam said to Martha one evening as they watched Phoenix demonstrate the perfect collection and extension that marked him as a horse of exceptional quality despite his wild origins. She would be proud of what he's become, and I think she'd be proud of what we've become together. As the sun set behind the mountains on another day in their remarkable partnership, Sam Creek sat on his porch and watched Phoenix graze in the field where his mother had once run free. The wheelchair that had once seemed like a prison had become simply a different way of moving through the world, no more limiting than the saddle was limiting to Phoenix. The future stretched ahead of them, filled with possibilities that neither could have imagined during those first tentative meetings at the fence. There would be more students to teach, more riders to inspire, more barriers to overcome together. But tonight, in the peaceful quiet of a small frontier town where miracles had become routine, it was enough to simply sit together and know that love and trust and determination could overcome anything that life might put in their path. The stars came out one by one above Millbrook, illuminating a world where a broken cowboy and a wild Mustang had found their way back to wholeness through each other, proving that some gifts are indeed too deep to be destroyed by tragedy and too powerful to be contained by limitation. In the distance, Phoenix lifted his head from grazing and nickered softly, a sound that carried across the evening air like a promise that tomorrow would bring new adventures for partners who had learned that the best dreams are the ones you never expected to dream.